And here we are. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Stephanie Barnes, as part of our Emerging Innovation series. And really, on the occasion of celebrating the International Day of Creativity and Innovation, which is an international day of observance, as set up by the United Nations. And certainly on behalf of the World Creativity and Innovation Organization, it is my distinct honor to welcome you and to thank you for dedicating the time from your busy schedule to have a conversation with us. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to our talk.
Thank you so much. So as we discussed sort of prior to this call, as we were sort of setting up the conversation, the format of today's conversation will be fairly open. So we'll just start with some questions and move on to a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll wrap up with some questions if that's okay.
Yep, sounds good. I have no slides.
Wonderful. That's perfect. So I think that really suits our conversational format very well.
Yeah.
And so again, I mean, thank you so much for being able to join us, because the International Day of Creativity and Innovation, as celebrated as an international observance by the United Nations, I think is really an invitation to highlight the fact that we're all creative, and that, we might not realize that in our daily jobs and work. And this particular series of interviews with international experts in creativity and innovation is really an invitation to discuss just that, to sort of bridge the gap, as it were, and to sort of expose this kind of dimension of accessibility of creativity that is really arguably inherent to us all. And so with that in mind, why don't we really kind of start with just a brief reflection on what kind of work you do actually, and sort of what you dedicate yourself in your daily practice.
Yeah, thanks. We might come back to, well, we need to come back to this, so you'll remind me, but I want to pick up on something that you just said there, and about our creativity. And our creativity gets educated out of us. And I'm not the first person to say that, and I'm not the only person that says that. But I do say that all the time, that, through our schooling, through our careers, our work environments, our creativity gets, removed from us. It's deemed non-essential, and yet it really is essential to us as human beings. It's part of who we are and what we are as human beings. So to come back to your question about my work, is become certainly that reinvigorating, relearning our creativity, because it has huge impacts on us. It has impacts on us as individuals, in our wellness and our mental health. It has impact on us as groups and teams in organizations, and how we collaborate and how we work together and create innovative new solutions and solve problems, and just how work gets done. So, and in this age of AI, so many of my talks now are about helping humans in an AI world, because the AI and the technology has just honestly just driven us to the edge of what it means to be human, and taken all of our humanity out of us, or certainly greatly reduced it. And so I'm all about bringing the humanity in, and that I do that through creativity. So take a breath there. Let you ask a follow-up question.
Thank you so much. That's an incredible sharing, and I really appreciate that. It's really interesting, because it makes one sort of wonder, as you say, how might we bring more of ourselves into our workspaces? How might we nurture that humanity, as we hear you so eloquently sort of point out, as a kind of a heritage of our species and of ourselves. And I really appreciate your invitation to sort of bring that into more of our both personal and work experience. So along those lines, I mean, tell us a little bit about how innovation might relate to your work, whether empowered by creativity or sort of other forces.
It just gets, so innovation is creating something new, is doing something new or different, for either for our organization specifically, or for the industry, or for the segment, or brand new in the world. There's lots of sort of ways to look at innovation, but helping people step out of their comfort zones, outside of those spreadsheets and those PowerPoint decks that we spend so much time, staring at our screens creating. you know, and doing something different, doing something fun and engaging that gets us out of our box, right? This is why I keep my clown nose on the desk, because we remind people to have fun, because we are much more innovative and creative when we're having fun, when we're being playful, when we're doing something that takes us away from that focused thinking and allows us to move into a more diverse thinking mode. And so the arts-based intervention stuff that I do, you know, really allows that and facilitates that. And some of the activities really don't take long. The biggest barrier to so much of the work that I do is the stories that we tell ourselves about, oh, I can't do that. You know, what would my boss say? What would my colleagues say? You know what? In my experience, they would be relieved. Unless maybe you have a micromanaging boss, in which case, you know, maybe it's time to change jobs. But but honestly, most people are relieved. I've never, in all the years of me and my clown nose, I've never had anybody freak out and get angry about me putting the clown nose on to remind us to be playful and have some fun, or taking 5 minutes out and doing a little guided visualization just to help us ground. And it really is as easy as that. Now, there are bigger interventions, certainly, but you know, it doesn't have to be as complicated as we think it is. But this is the fallacy of our education system that's told us that this stuff isn't important. What's important is math and science, you know. And I have an accounting undergrad in accounting, so you know, I'm all about the process and the numbers and things. But the best thing I ever did was start to paint, you know, and start to do some photography and some drawing, and realize that there was more to life than the numbers. And what, though, doing those things brought to my ability to do those things, to crunch the numbers and create the spreadsheets, when I'd taken a break and you know, allowed my brain to crunch the numbers and come up with a solution while I did other things.
Wow, that's just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, because even I think as we're listening to you sharing this, it has a kind of an empowering effect. You know, as soon as you hear another person, another professional, to almost, you know, the phrase that comes to my mind is almost like dare to be creative, workspaces and workplaces and with our colleagues. And as you said, with our supervisors and others, you know, it almost at least I feel kind of almost encourages us that, hey, you know, this is possible. And in fact, it could have really beneficial results. I really appreciate your phrase, you know, that you kind of mentioned a few moments earlier, that kind of creativity is educated out of us. And as you say, you know, this has been kind of, you know, stated numerous times by various great thinkers, you know, that as kids, maybe we're all creative, and then by some age, we kind of start moving in some other direction. And so the mode of your work of kind of moving into helping organizations and leaders and individuals kind of move into more of an artistic mode through these, you know, arts-based interventions. It's very interesting, you know, to reflect on that in the context of these stories that we tell ourselves, because, you know, I get a sense that perhaps some of the stories we tell ourselves are maybe not so empowering, and maybe they're a little bit limiting even. And so it sounds as if, you know, your work is really partially grounded in this notion of expanding the stories we tell about ourselves and our organizations. Would you like to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's an area of my work that's actually expanding, is that one-on-one coaching to help people have the confidence, you know, and give them somebody that knows and understands and that's been through this, and can help them, you know, through the challenges of, okay, I'm going to lead this workshop tomorrow. I'm going to wear a clown nose, you know, or whatever, you know, or we're going to do a drawing activity the next time we do a team meeting, just to do a different kind of icebreaker and energizer. And so, yeah, the whole coaching thing, and coaching mentoring thing, because I look at it as more than just coaching. It's really, a colleague of mine calls it being a sparring partner. And so I'm kind of mixed on that that terminology, to be honest, just because sparring comes from boxing and, you know, has this violence thing, and the stuff that I do is anything but violent. So I'm not so sure about that, but it is a
Right.
mix of coaching and mentoring, because I'm sharing my experience. I'm not just you know, coaches typically just ask a bunch of questions and let you figure it out, right? And so I'm sharing my experiences and asking my questions from that place of knowledge and experience. So it's more of a blend of coaching and mentoring. So
That's so fantastic, and also it reminds me, something you said there reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, namely that a lot of your work is also now related to AI and to the role that we as human beings and colleagues and people that are adding value at workplaces, play in the kind of this AI infused landscape. It's actually very interesting because you also mentioned that you have a career, your early career was in accounting, and so it's quite interesting that you were able to bridge this gap between a kind of a very rational, very kind of numbers oriented world, as you kind of mentioned, spreadsheets, all those things we associate with accounting that colloquially we might not think is very creative, and then you started taking, even though I know that's not true because a number of accountants, but that's the popular perception, and that you managed to bridge that and go in the direction of much more sort of painting and art and creativity. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How did you find the courage to do that, or the how did you invite yourself to do that? And then how did the journey look like for you? Because it seems like quite an interesting sort of personal development journey.
yeah. Um, Let me just respond to the AI part of your comment there. With the AI stuff, I had a team about a well, I'm just looking at my calendar. I'm gonna say about a month ago, on a call, the exploration call, and there's like, AI is making us more stupid. It's making us dumb, you know. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And because you put these words into it and it spews something out that sounds good, and you kind of just accept it because the technology, we've been trained to believe that the technology gives us the right answer, right? And so we don't question it. And so yeah, it was really interesting to have this conversation with this person saying, AI is making us dumb. And yeah, I see that, you
Yeah.
know, I do. And it's unfortunate and it's heartbreaking, because I think the technology is useful and it does do some useful and some important things that humans struggle with, like seeing patterns. But there are things that it's being used for now that are really destructive and harming on an individual level and on a group level. And I'm really concerned about that. Um, so yeah, so I'll get off my AI soapbox. Back to my journey from accounting. I was very serious about accounting for years, and I have an MBA in IT. So, even after I decided accounting wasn't my thing, I still stuck with that very process oriented business, IT stuff, and I was good. I was good at it. I am good at it. Because it's very practical and it's logical and all those things. But what really started to open up for me was I started a PhD and I quit because I just couldn't handle it. I was working full time and trying to do the PhD full time, and it was just too much. And I quit. And it's like, okay, other people have hobbies. Um, I don't have any hobbies because I've been so dedicated to knowledge, or to accounting for so long, and to business and for school so long. So I started exploring, and I did photography and I did drawing and I did, took golf lessons and all kinds of stuff, just checking out different hobbies and things. And I liked the arts stuff, the photography, the drawing. Golf wasn't really my thing. Neither was mountain biking or cliff climbing, rock climbing. But I did like the arts. And then I got into a leadership workshop in 2011, and we painted. And I was like, oh, this is fun. How do I bring this into my, knowledge management consulting practice? Because I was already self-employed by then for 8 years. And so I just started bringing it into the workshops and things that I was doing, when I did strategy development workshop or requirements analysis workshop or whatever my workshop was, I just brought these little creative activities in, and it really shifted the energy in the room. People were more engaged. I got better answers. The time seemed to fly by. I started doing these same little exercises right at the end of the workshops, when, after half a day of, answering questions and doing flip charts and sticky notes and things, how we do in workshops, do a little creative activity before I send them back to their desks or their offices, and notice a shift in the energy again, that they're like, okay, excellent. I get to go back and do 300 emails in my inbox, and they're not mad at me that I've pulled them away from their desk for half a day anymore. And so that was really, really interesting to me to watch that shift, um, you know, from doing them at the beginning and at the end. And yeah, and it really inspired me to keep going and pulling on this thread. And so that was, like I say, 2011, 2012. And so I've just continued to pull on that thread. And that was part of the reason, I moved to Berlin. I'm Canadian. I moved from Toronto to Berlin 8.5 years ago, because there was much more interest in Europe in this intersection space, in the arts, in organizations, and a much more recognition that they had a place, where North Americans at that point, 8 years ago or 9 years ago, when I made the decision to move, were really not interesting. I am seeing that start to shift, but still Europe seems much more welcoming to that whole idea, so than North America. So and Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, I've had some good talks with people there: Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand. A lot of interest there too. So yeah, it's really interesting how this idea is starting to get more acceptance in organizations. I think the pandemic helped a lot, really. I better take a breath and
Wow.
ask another question.
That's amazing. Please go ahead. I think you've given us so much to reflect on there. Thank you so much. It's so interesting. And starting with your kind of discourse on the artificial intelligence and AI, which I think is so relevant. I mean, to some extent or another, I'm an innovation designer, and a design strategist. I work as part of like yourself, and kind of a consultancy focusing on innovations. So, sooner or later, the topic of AI sort of comes up. And I feel like, as a global community, we are wrestling with these notions around how shall artificial intelligence really impact our various socio-cultural spheres. And certainly work is one of the important ones there. And what I truly appreciate about your discourse there is that I feel as if you're inviting us to, in a way, go back to our creative background, and to leverage that in addition to technology and AI as a way of moving forward, which is actually very interesting because, perhaps it's unsurprising that our focus on STEM and on sciences and on kind of these types of competencies was so strong over the previous decades, because perhaps a lot of our sort of creativity and production and productivity as organizations and countries and economies really relied on that. And now, as AI is kind of becoming very competent in crunching numbers, we sort of find ourselves wondering, well, what are we going to be doing? And maybe perhaps this invitation that we hear you sort of suggest, well, hey, we're also very, very creative. Maybe part of this, the answer for us, perhaps. So I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it is. Our creativity is really what distinguishes us or separates us from AI, and people, somebody tagged me the other day in a post about AI creating art, and I couldn't even bring myself to respond, because the stuff that AI creates is not art, in my opinion. And I appreciate that there are other opinions out there, but as an artist myself, because after I did this leadership workshop in 2011, I started painting. You can see my studio behind me here in my office space in my apartment. It's become part of who I am. And so, the stuff that AI creates, it's something, but I'm not sure that I would call it art. And because it's just taking stuff that's been created someplace else and mimicking, and it's not creating something new from the hearts and minds of an actual human being. It's just imitating, and it's not, like I say, I don't want to call it art. It,
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. One of my early backgrounds was in computer science, where I was working on an undergrad in computer science. So if I were to put that hat on, as a computer scientist, I must say, wow, this is some amazing algorithms. This is very impressive that, we've gotten to the point where these, machine learning sort of approaches are capable of doing this, composing music or doing art or whatever. It's just that, it simultaneously reminds me of your earlier comment that when you were working with your clients, when you are working with your clients, whether they're in management or organizations, with team leaders or team members, how they respond to you kind of doing these arts-based interventions, that they actually leave with more energy. And this is, I think, something that we might not always take into account when we consider art, that it's a process and an engagement. We engage in this process, and it has embodied effects on us. It gives us more energy, is what we're hearing you say. It changes something about the climate of those organizations. And several people have argued, and I think we're hearing you say as well, that it makes it easier to innovate in such environments. So this approach to art as a process that restructures spaces and makes them more amenable to innovation and creativity, I think is something that is enacted. It's not just a question of producing an artwork. It's about us going through this process, is what we're hearing you say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about the process. And I tell people that all the time in the workshops that I do. When I do longer workshops, we do these layered paintings, and people get very anxious about that, because a lot of people have bad experiences in art, honestly, excuse me, from school. As did I. Eighth grade, I had an art teacher that criticized my perspective, exercise, and that was the last time I did anything artistic at all. And so a lot of people have those kinds of experiences. And so there's this, and then they've been to art galleries and things, and they see these photorealistic paintings and things, and go, oh well, they think that that's what they should create. No, it's not. It's about the process. It's about overcoming the voice in your head that says, well, I can't put paint on that clean white canvas. What if I do it wrong? There is no wrong. I do on purpose, I do abstract paintings. There is nothing to compare it to. It's not, oh, it doesn't really look like a tree or an apple, because it's not a tree or an apple, And so, and sometimes people really struggle with that. Well, I need to look at something, I need to reproduce it. And if that's where they are, then that's what they'll do. But I really do encourage people just to experiment and tune into their intuition, because this is something else that we've lost in the process of being overly analytical and process oriented, is the connection with our intuition. And so I encourage people to hold the paint in their hand. Do I want to use orange? Do I want to use red? How does that feel? Should I use this brush? Should I use that brush? And just check in with yourself. How does that feel? What is that? Does that feel good? Does that feel bad? How does the black make you feel? Um, and so that process, it's about the process of tuning into our intuition, and just letting things be whatever they're going to be. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop there because I forget what the question was.
No, I think the sharing was simply wonderful. I think you covered so many interesting aspects there to give us really the wonderful reflections to think about. What it made me really reflect on is that, you're an international expert on knowledge management, and you have worked across all continents. You also have, significant academic presence. I believe you're on the editorial board of a recognized academic journal. And so you're working in a variety of fields, with organizations and academics on very serious projects and initiatives where being competitive in marketplaces, building new knowledge is very relevant. So how do you find creativity and innovation helping us, in these contexts, and are they perhaps even more relevant today than before, given that our world seems to be a little bit more complex?
I think absolutely it helps us cope with the way things are. Things are changing rapidly, and constantly. And so there's no, I mentioned I have 2 degrees. I have an undergrad in accounting and an MBA in IT. And the things that I learned then, yeah, they're not necessarily wrong, but they have definitely changed and evolved over the years since I have graduated. And now, like, I look at some of the papers and things that I read 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and the continuing research and things that are being done and things that are coming out. So even stuff from 5 years ago, I've got to go, oh, is this still relevant? And so we need to be curious. We need to stop assuming that what we learned in school, even if we just graduated last year or 2 years ago, that that's still the way that things are. There are some things that certainly don't change that quickly, but there are other things that do. And I think the pandemic certainly changed a lot, with our work environments and people wanting jobs that were more fulfilling and more aligned with their purpose, and didn't have the micromanaging bosses, and want to work remotely, want to work from home or someplace else in the world entirely. Want to be able to take an extended, I don't want to call it vacation, but uh, workcation, is that what I heard them called? Like, go and work someplace else, and live someplace else for 3 months or 6 months, and yeah, combine work with vacation and things. And so we need to change our workplaces and change the way that we're working, to make it, healthier for people that want to live that way, and do those things. And so the arts-based interventions are a way to bring people together, to create the relationships, in a virtual setting, because I do all this stuff virtually. I haven't done an in-person workshop since before the pandemic started. We paint virtually, and we have these amazing conversations and discoveries on Zoom or Teams, or whatever we're using, and it's really nice to see the relationships and the connections blooming through this technology, not just staring at somebody's PowerPoint decks, and talking all the time. Zoom is still there, but what we're focused on is the painting in front of us or the drawing in front of us, and we hold it up to the screen and things, and create connection and have these shared experiences from wherever in the world that we are. So it's really lovely to watch that happen. And yeah, people need to be more
Wow.
open. That just helps our curiosity and our team building and our mental health and all of these things. So
I love that. I really love that. And you mentioned so many interesting points there. One of them is certainly mental health. I mean, this is something that I think both as team members and leaders and participants in communities, we're increasingly focused on, because this great degree of change, as you mentioned, it's on one hand a great sort of space for the exploration of all kinds of creativity, but on the other hand, it also presents a certain pressures on us as human beings that are maybe used to a little bit more kind of a flat and unchanging kind of environment. So it's very interesting to hear how you use creativity with your clients and with your communities of practice, really to sort of create a little bit more of a welcoming environment, a little bit more of peace, helping them, we heard you say, finding purpose and being more confident in what they're doing. And all of these things have been kind of recognized as really kind of critical for productivity these days in what some people are calling kind of the age of complexity. I realize we're kind of coming up close to the end of our allocated time, and I have so many questions, but I just want to ask at least one more, if possible.
okay.
And when we think about what we were calling the pre-modern times, I guess, the times before the Enlightenment, and I guess what we're calling modernity, if we think about the some of the people that we really admire, such as Leonardo da Vinci, whose birthday actually marks the beginning of this week of celebration, April the 15th,
Mhm.
we noticed that there was a much more kind of integrated approach in pre-modernity to what we now think of as distinct sciences and disciplines and arts and so on. So thinking about how Leonardo da Vinci thought about botany and drawing and engineering, and art and painting, these would today and are, seemingly very different fields. And at some point, we used to think of this as kind of part of what was, I guess, then called natural philosophy. We were more scientists, were more natural philosophers. And I guess in various circles, there are now calls towards more holistic integration from various perspectives, whether we want to think of it sort of psychologically and from a kind of psychiatric perspective, for example, Dr. Ian McGilchrist with his hemisphere hypothesis, sort of inviting us to not just overemphasize one part of the brain, but maybe use all of our brain, to sort of critical theory, thinking about metamodernity and sort of trying to understand what comes after this whole postmodern period. But however we think about it, it seems that again, in various circles, there's this kind of call for integrating across these various fields of practice that now seem to be kind of separated. And we're trying to move towards this integration. And so it's interesting to hear that in your own personal background, you've actually managed to do that, which again is so inspiring because you have multiple backgrounds. So I guess that's where my question is sort of leading. How might you think about, how might these intersections between your multiple backgrounds help you bring value to your clients and communities of practice, given that you have a background as an MBA in technology and you have a background in accounting, and obviously you're a creative practitioner and you're also an academic. So how do you see these intersections as bringing value?
I think there's a real magic that comes out of the intersection. I think the more as we have come forward from Da Vinci's time, to now, I think the volume of knowledge that people are somehow expected to know or be aware of has grown exponentially to the point where we really can't. So 500, 600, 700 years ago, people, educated scholars could pretty much have a good awareness, certainly, of what was known in the world at that point, and it's just impossible now. Um, and so, yeah, I think though coming forward again, that intersection is where the magic happens. The magic doesn't happen inside the box, inside our increasing specialization. It's it the magic comes from recognizing the similarities across the silos, across the disciplines, and go, oh, well, that's the case over here. What happens over here? Or what happens when I bring these two ideas together? This innovation, this is where innovation comes out of, right? Is in the intersection of something, combining two different things that weren't combined before. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember the chocolate and peanut butter. That makes me the Reese's peanut butter cup commercials from when I was a kid, right? So the magic that happens when you put those things together, and the happy accidents, the serendipity that happens by being curious, by experimenting, looking at different things. And so a lot of people do have different things, different interests in their backgrounds. They just don't bring them into work. And so a lot of what I do is say, well, there's a place for that. Maybe it's hard to bring the garden or the kitchen into into the office, but drawing, painting, creativity absolutely is there. And if you're working from home, then and everybody else is working from home, then well, maybe you do some, cooking activity together as part of a bigger workshop. Bring your laptop in the kitchen and cook something together, and have that kind of discussion, and like I say, as part of a bigger experience, like I do with the painting. So yeah, I think there's a lot of possibility there. You just have to start asking the question of, oh, I want to do this. How might I do this? Right? Everybody says, how might I? How might I? It's usually in some kind of user interface design questionnaire. Well, how might I bring more creativity and arts into my organization, because it does have, I think I have like a slide someplace that has like a dozen use cases for arts-based interventions. Everything, everything that we've talked about today, from wellness and sustainability, mental health, team building, all kinds of things. So there is a place, and you mentioned Ian McGilchrist and his books. Another of my favorite books is Your Brain on Art by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. I usually have my copy on my desk, and it's not here. But yeah, I recommend it to everyone. It's all the neuroscience of art and why it's important to us as human beings. So
Wow, you've really given us a lot to think about, and I think this has been such an inspirational dialogue. Thank you so much, Stephanie
you're welcome.
Barnes. If you have a few more moments, maybe perhaps we can open it to the participants
Sure.
for comments and sharing. So go right ahead. If anyone has a question, feel free to just dive right in.
Thanks very much, Stephanie, for that. I know of you because of your work in knowledge management, because I come from that background,
Yeah.
but I've also had a parallel career in the arts.
Ah,
So yeah, so now I actually teach seniors creativity
oh,
through
nice.
singing mainly. Yeah, so that's what drew me to this talk as well. I think it's really nice that finally, I think, like people are starting to see the convergence of two kind of like, I hate to say this, but left brain, right brain kind of stuff. And yeah, and why it's so important. I do the work because I also want to help people delay the onset of dementia.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's really where the intersection also lies. It's so important to access both sides, the whole brain rather, yeah, rather
Yeah.
than a side. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some really interesting research around music and Alzheimer's and things. So that's amazing that you're working with seniors.
Thank you for that question and that reflection, Cheryl. That's wonderful. And in itself, I think a wonderful example of creativity that ought to be celebrated. I would invite you to also share your celebrations at a World Creativity and Innovation, because that sounds like a whole other topic that could be explored. So thank you so much for sharing that. So exciting. Any other questions? Henry, did you want to weigh in on anything or comment on anything? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to construct a question or a comment, but very interesting. Thank you so much. I think a bit of an issue I see when you say on the one side all this breaking out of what we do, right, and just start painting and start breaking out of the box, right? That's all wonderful. At the same time, and that's the connection to knowledge management, right, which I think is very much about also reusing in a sense things that you've learned elsewhere, right? And maybe, I mean, the example for me is I'm kind of moving from academia to practice, trying to help public sector clients to build up innovation clusters, right? And a lot of what we do is we use our frameworks and we use our PowerPoint slides and we fill them in for our clients, right? Basically for their specific situation. So
Yeah.
sure, you can always break out of it and try to do something completely new, but also always you feel the need to come back to things also just to stay efficient in some way.
Yeah, and knowledge management has focused a lot on that reuse part of the equation. You capture and reuse it.
Exactly.
It's spent less time talking about creation, knowledge creation. So innovation, you might have your template that you need to fill in, but the stuff that you fill in maybe is something new and innovative and creative, right? You have to fill those boxes in, but it's something filled in with something new. And so this is where the radical KM is what I call my brand of knowledge management, bringing creativity and arts-based interventions into the equation, is much more about that knowledge creation and becoming aware, in some cases surfacing tacit knowledge, maybe things that people didn't realize that they knew, or putting the pieces together in a different way and capturing that. That's a big theme in knowledge management this year, the last year and a bit maybe, is how do we capture tacit knowledge, because things are changing so quickly. And you can't capture all of tacit knowledge, but there is tacit knowledge that can be captured, certainly. And so surfacing it through creative activity, because sometimes people aren't aware of what they know, right? And so using that as kind of a oil to grease the wheels, you know, of oh, I didn't realize I knew that, you know, can be really helpful in problem solving and things. So this is what I look at more, and I think as things change and the rapidity with which things are changing, we need to focus a little bit less on creating those document repositories and, you know, looking at how knowledge gets created and helping people be curious and not just go, oh, well, this is from 15 years ago and somebody saved it in the repository, I'm just going to reuse it because it's there. And help them be curious and ask the question, well, okay, they did that 10 or 15 years ago. Is it relevant? Is there something new that I should be looking at? Is this a thread that I need to pull and investigate? And where is the thinking now on this? And rather than accepting just the answer. So, you know, I think a lot of times we look at productivity as, you know, being efficient and effective. And I think, and I was commenting on a LinkedIn post this morning about this, makes me think of a case study that I have of two teams that were trying to solve a problem. For 10 years, they tried to solve this problem, and politics and personal behaviors and, you know, all kinds of things got in the way of solving the problem. And the two teams came together. They created a studio space in the office, and they brought the two teams together for a week-long workshop in this studio where there are all kinds of arts materials and things. And in this 5-day workshop, facilitated workshop, they solved the problem. So, you know, people go look at my arts-based intervention stuff and go, oh, but that's not efficient and effective, because I don't see, we think the straight line is efficient and effective. Well, the straight line took 10 years and didn't solve the problem. And this fuzzy, artistic, creative thing took 5 days and solved the problem. So what's efficient and effective?
Yeah. Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Wow, great question, Henry, and a wonderful, great reflection, Henry. Wonderful response and reflection, Stephanie. Thank you both so much, because as I think I was listening to the two of you sort of articulating this beautiful and I think such an important point that all of us as innovators face, I was reminded of a meeting with a friend who's a senior professor at a local university here, and we were just talking about students, you know, and supervising students. And my friend was mentioning that, well, you know, PhD students often come and they want to reinvent everything. And, you know, his point was that, well, I tell them that, you know, they can't reinvent everything because science is incremental, you know, things build on each other. And so you have to build on what's already there. Then you have to come up with something new. And, you know, that kind of reminded me of your point, Henry, that I think as we're building innovation, competencies and clusters and communities of practice, it is indeed, to your point, so important that we build on the existing things, on that knowledge management, on the other assets that we have. And then what we're hearing you say, Stephanie, is then that next step of adding new knowledge and new value. In your own practice, you call it radical knowledge management. You're sort of questioning and sort of saying, okay, well, here's the existing foundation, and now how can we combine it in interesting new ways? You know, that are relevant to this business or this organization or this economy or this country. So it's quite fascinating. I sort of feel like that dialectic that the two of you expose is critical to innovation. It seems so interesting. Any other comments or points? First of all, just back to you, Stephanie. Did you want to add anything else to what Cheryl and Henry were sort of talking about? Any other thoughts?
The only other thing I might add is about, you know, how much things have changed and the pace of change and how much turnover there has been. And so doing the arts-based intervention stuff that I do, the creativity stuff that I do, helps build relationships, and there's a team building aspect of it, regardless of whether we're doing it face-to-face or whether we're, you know, doing it on Zoom. There's this team building aspect. And so people who don't know each other, who are new to a team, can have this shared experience that is fun and it's playful, and it's also going to help them be more innovative and creative, and have all these things. And so I mentioned about my slide with the 12 use cases. You can't just pick and say, oh, I'm going to focus on team building. If you pick one, it's going to spill over into everything else, because it's not isolated. It's not a one-to-one relationship, which is something else we've been taught. So a lot of times when I talk about this stuff with people, they go, oh, but you're telling me it has an impact on mental health, and you're telling me it has an impact on team building, you're telling me it has an impact on sustainability, and but it's the same activity. I'm like, well, yeah, it is, but that's not allowed. Yeah, it is. We've got this false, mindset, this false one-to-one mindset that's come, we've been trained through science of we have to, cause and effect, everything cause and effect. Well, art is half of what we are. So it's not a one-to-one. So which is one of the things that this book, Your Brain on Art, actually talks about, how art really does have all these impacts, and yeah, it is a bit of a panacea.
That's just amazing. Such a wonderful conversation. And I feel like we're in a conversation with 3 experts here. So I think we got 3 for 1. So this is just wonderful. Any other closing comments or questions or reflections, Cheryl and Henry, and any other thoughts before we thank Stephanie for today?
No, it's just to say that it's been so nice to have this opportunity to hear Stephanie in person. It's always nice to have face-to-face, right?
Thank you. It's been nice. I'm glad that you could make it, and it was good to see you too, Henry. So I'm glad you could make it today. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for participating and for such insightful and wonderful questions. Thank you so much, Stephanie Barnes, for kindly dedicating the time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the occasion of celebrating the World Creativity and Innovation Week and Day as part of the United Nations International Day of Observance. And thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge that I think are going to stay with us for quite some time. And I look forward to our future discussions as well, that I'm certain will follow.
thanks. Me too.
Thanks so much. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.